Hi everyone, I'm Danielle Byington, and in this video we're going to talk about some background information leading up to the Canterbury Tales, specifically the Miller's Tale. I'm going to go over about 3 slides of information with you, starting with the author's background and biography. Commonly, you hear Chaucer referred to as the English Homer. So, if you haven't studied Homer, that's who we attribute the text, the Iliad and the Odyssey to. So, that means that we're talking about an author who is correlated with a piece of artwork, a literature piece, a written work that really causes or is part of a significant cultural shift. So, in the case of Homer, it's all of that stuff, all of the background of like the fall of Troy and the Greek mythology that goes on to feed Western civilization, and then that shift late on throughout time and into the Middle Ages. Now, in this case with Chaucer, you're going to see that his stories were important, but it has more to do with the language that he wrote them in. So Chaucer might have had a chance to do what he did as an author because he is born into the solid middle class by this time. If you're a student in my class and you are using the Norton anthology set, that biography of Chaucer in that set specifically seems to focus on how social class was a really shifting thing at that time. So you basically had 3 notable classes. You had nobility, the church, and then everybody else. So the commoners. And the thing about the commoners is that not everyone was just a poor peasant anymore or just a farmer relying on agriculture. You had merchants, in the case of Chaucer, like his family. So there is a another like sort of societal shift that happens in his case where because he ends up able to work as a page in the court of King Edward III, later on one of his children, or we assume it's one of his children, Thomas Chaucer, um, works like in nobility, and then he has a daughter who goes on to marry someone in that social class too. So by then they're no longer just middle class. By that third generation, so 2 generations down from Geoffrey Chaucer, his family has basically bolstered themselves in the nobility class. So the whole point about where we're going in the Canterbury Tales, I'm going to talk about the background of the text a little more, but it's really important to know the significance of Canterbury Cathedral as well. So in my video where I talk about it's a brief intro to the Middle Ages in Britain, and I mentioned how there are those layers, right? We have Roman occupied Britain, and then we go into like England actually being England in the terms of the Middle Ages, anyways. So a you've had a change in religion at this point, and so, of course, society has changed, the culture and its practices have changed, the economy has changed. Um, Canterbury Cathedral, it's about a 2-hour train ride south to the southeast-ish of London. And Canterbury Cathedral itself is built on top of the ruins of what was the Roman temple of Roman occupied Britain way back when. So this is more of the layers again, like I talked about in that first video. So everyone is going to Canterbury Cathedral, not just because it's this large, beautiful piece of architecture. They're going there because something has happened and we have a martyr whose remains are there. So Sir Thomas Becket. Uh, Basically, he was causing some trouble for a king who wanted this priest out of the way. Now, this was a common practice in this time. It's even discussed in some of the other Canterbury Tales, the trade or showing or belief in relics. And what this is essentially is the piece of a quote unquote saint, a holy person, so a member from that church class. And it might be it was usually bones. It could have been something they wore, but bones would have been a common relic because you can deceive people. It was not unheard of for people to go around, showing relics, making a profit off of this, selling even these quote unquote relics that were really just like chicken bones and things like that, because the poor people who were uneducated, probably illiterate, had never even actually read the Bible that their society told them they had to, that this is a state religion that they needed to believe in and trust. They were being totally taken advantage of by these members of the church who would go around selling or showing these alleged relics that were just junk. And so that was a thing. But in the case of Sir Thomas Becket, he really was recognized as a saint, as a martyr. And so people would be making a pilgrimage to Canterbury Cathedral to pay homage to his remains. And there's also the whole bit about hair shirt that I get in here, that it's allegedly discovered when he died that he was wearing a hair shirt. And what that means is it was an act of penance. It was a sign of his devotion to his faith, because these hair shirts, it'd be kind of like an undershirt that you would wear under your regular robes or garments or whatever it would be that you're wearing in that time. And it was made from really coarse materials, say, sheep's wool that hadn't been refined, and so it's very coarse. And if you wear it all day, every day, you're gonna have the worst chafing of your life. And this pain, this discomfort, was a way of practicing penance and devotion, like a mind over matter sort of thing. So Sir Thomas Becket was looked at as the real deal compared to the chicken bones and such that were rotating around England and Europe and elsewhere. So, moving on to the text itself, we have everyone going on the pilgrimage to Canterbury Cathedral. And when they're going, initially, Chaucer was planning on writing about two tells told by each pilgrim on the way to the cathedral, and then two told by each pilgrim on the way back. So he planned for a much larger text than what you have. And you don't have the full thing in the Norton either. So if you ever see a copy of just the Canterbury Tales by themselves, and it's one with annotations too, it's usually a really large chunk of a book. So imagine, had he lived long enough to complete what he planned, it would be an even more extensive text. And maybe the most commonly assigned tells are probably the Miller's Tale, and the Wife of Bath's tell, and maybe the Knight's tell. Probably, this is just my speculation, what I see most often in curriculums. This would be the three most common ones at high school and college level. So this might not even necessarily be the go-to pieces that we would cover if he had been able to finish it. So one reason it's not finished is he's writing it in about the last 14-ish years of his life. We assume he began this in about the mid 1380s, and it's popular in his own time. So he was a successful poet, author, writer in his own time. So much so, they bury this guy in Westminster Abbey, which, if you've ever seen things like it's any of the major royal events like coronations or weddings, that's where that happens. It's like the seat of the Anglican Church. And because he's buried there, it started this trend of, well, let's bury other influential authors in this same section of Westminster Abbey as well. And then it eventually becomes known as Poets' Corner. So I mentioned earlier that the main thing that really puts Chaucer on the map, it's not just the tells, given they are clever. You will certainly enjoy it when you read it in modern English because you probably, if you're watching this video, and like I've said in other videos, unless you're studying advanced medieval literature or graduate level, you're probably reading this in a modern English translation and not the original Middle English. But that's the thing about it being written in the original Middle English. It was written in the vernacular. And when I say vernacular, we're talking about the everyday language of the people. So even look at modern English now. If you watch a movie from the 1940s or 50s, we don't sound the same anymore. And there are obvious surface things linguistically, like slang and idioms, expressions, and such that change. Maybe those are a little more fluid, like per decade. And on the other hand, though, there's this like more deeply seated change. It's like a slower evolution of the language as it changes, where the intonation is changing. I mean, think about if English is the main language of the United States in most places, and you have different dialects, how those evolved from groups of people when Britain was first colonizing the 13 colonies, and how there would have eventually been a trend of people no longer have the British dialect anymore. So it would have been more common, more popular, more acceptable to write a book, poetry nonetheless, in Latin. But also at this time, if you remember in my first video, by about this time, this is after the Norman conquest. And so a lot of the upper class is speaking French, actually. And but on the other hand, there's this sort of more common language going on, and that's Middle English. And Chaucer is writing a Middle English with a London dialect. There would have been different dialects of even that Middle English, especially like the further you would go north in England. Like you're going further north where there would have been less of that French influence in the south of England. And so when Chaucer writes this in Middle English using the vernacular, and this is like the perfect recipe, and it's popular, and these are beloved stories, then all of a sudden people are like, hey, like English is a thing, and like we can write in English, we don't have to write in Latin, and we don't necessarily have to speak French. So this changes the pace linguistically, this changes the linguistic landscape. So that is it for the slides. I'm going to show you something on Google Maps real quick. So first, I'm going to point here. I have Canterbury Cathedral further to the southeast pinpointed, but not his entire life. But at one point, this would have been about the part that we believe Chaucer lived in when he would have seen what was a pilgrimage road that led down to Canterbury. So let me back out a lot so you can kind of see a little more what's going on. Okay, so here's Europe, the UK, and down here, if you remember in my first video, if you're a student in my class anyways, I'm going to talk about the brief intro to the Middle Ages. Canterbury Cathedral is right here in that in the county of Kent, right here where we initially had the Romans beginning their occupation of the land. Okay, and so they would have been going. I didn't mean to zoom in that much, sorry. He's talking about them going from London to Canterbury Cathedral down here. Um, it would have been a common thing for people when they traveled a distance like that to just travel in bands. Because um, even if you were wealthy and you could afford a carriage to drive you there alone, that would be stupid because you're probably going to set yourself up to be robbed because it would look like very evidently that you have money or it's something with you worth stealing. So it would have been a common thing for bands of people to travel together on foot or on horseback on these roads. So, safety in numbers, right? Um, there is another thing about Canterbury Cathedral right here. So you see how and we've got the coast of France right there across the English Channel. That there are if you ever do get a chance to visit Canterbury Cathedral, like one of the things is a popular thing in the gift shop and a lot of the I guess you could say it's a type of iconography even that you see in the city. It's a seashell like a clamshell, um, because when people would make this pilgrimage to Canterbury Cathedral from even the continent, coming up here from, say, Dover, going up to Canterbury Cathedral, a trail of seashells sort of initialized this or it helped people not familiar with the territory know or the guides even know that they are on the right path. Okay, so that's all I have for you for this background information on the Canterbury Tales. And please watch the next video on the Miller's Tale. Thank you.